artificial intelligence being used in the renewable energy space is to do with precision, automation, and just prediction, right? Think about things like renewable energy estimation or renewable energy prediction. So you find that given the data, like people are using artificial intelligence to be able to predict how much renewable energy they can be able to harness depending on the weather conditions, number one, or even historical data. And that's currently happening on the continent, right? So that's the main example that comes to mind with how it's being used on the continent.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because we're really trying to ask ourselves a question: how do we make renewable energy more efficient? And that's where AI comes in. We have a lot of different kinds of technologies that are coming out. We have like smart grids, we have energy optimization. We have a lot that's going on. I think one of the companies we invested in, actually, Asoba, is a great example. So for context, Asoba is probably the first virtual power plant in South Africa. And what they do, they're essentially an aggregator for municipalities that allow them to distribute energy at a better price point and really make sure that they can distribute between suppliers, distributors, as well as like the end users to make sure that buyers and sellers are interacting directly. So what I want to say here is that when it comes to renewable energy, there's a lot of opportunities, but what really matters is with any renewable energy, you have to look at the data. That's what matters at the end of the day. It's a machine. If you have good inputs, you get good outputs. And the only way to have good inputs is to have like really fucking good data. So it's the biggest challenge, but it's also the biggest opportunity. If you can have a system and have processes and a structure in place that gathers a lot of good data, put that into whatever your business model is, whatever the technology is, you can have an impact for your business, differentiate yourself, but also make a big difference. So I think overall there are a lot of benefits. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sad and Vivian. You both touched on what's the good, but I think as we look at AI, it's coming with a lot of challenges and potential pitfalls that we need to watch out for. So maybe to hear from you guys, what do you think are the potential limitations or challenges of using AI in driving sustainability within the renewable energy sector?
Two challenges come to mind. Integrating artificial intelligence in already existing renewable energy systems can be a bit complex and costly. And the second one I'd say is the data has to be available and of quality. So if it's not available and the data is not of quality, then the accuracy of what you're trying to do with your AI won't work. I'll give you an example. When you think of like predictive maintenance, right? Being able to know when your system will have downtime or when your system will require maintenance. If you want to do that, say you're using the digital twin model in the AI space, being able to know where to place the sensors, how to then extract data in real time, so that you're representing your physical renewable energy infrastructure digitally and tracking it, and real time being able to know when to expect downtime so as to reduce costs and plan accordingly can be costly and at times complex. So I would say that's a major limitation. And the second one, if you're thinking of something like renewable energy forecasting, right? If you don't have the data, especially in rural Africa, if the data does not exist, then it becomes a bit limiting to even forecast and know we expect to harness this amount of data so we can use it this much so that we don't experience blackout. So I would say those are the two major challenges that come to mind.
Thank you, Vivian. Asad?
Yeah, I want to focus a little on this element of AI and carbon credits. So I think there's a lot of good things that can happen with carbon credits, but you have a few pitfalls. And I think it's like any relationship. When you start off, there's like a honeymoon phase. You feel like you're always holding hands together. You feel like top of the world. But what you start to realize is that, well, few months, there might be some issues. Maybe the person has, he's into weird things, or there might be some issues. Maybe he has 5 girlfriends that he doesn't tell you about. There are a few things. One issue, I think, especially when we're looking at carbon credits, is that we don't really have a standardized mechanism or like protocols of verifying. You have Vera, you have Gold Standard. All of these methodologies, they're slightly different, and there's no standardized structure in place. So I guess one issue is the standardization of it all. But we're still at a pretty nascent stage when it comes to carbon credits, and that infrastructure is going to be built. It's just going to take some time. Rome wasn't built in a day. The carbon credit infrastructure of Africa isn't going to be built in a day. It's going to take years. But when it is built, we have an opportunity to be ready. And that's why getting in at this early stage is super, super important. So we can leverage, like as Josh was saying, this early adopter sense of entrepreneurship, this excitement, and really be ready to catalyze when the time strikes and when the opportunity is there.
Thank you. And just as you touched on carbon credits and appreciating the impact that it can have, we as the Global South are generally catching up to where everyone is in terms of carbon credits. How do you think we can use carbon credits to incentivize development within the renewable energy sector? Perhaps Dan, you can start us off.
Yeah, happy to start. Yeah, massive, massive potential. I think there are 2 big ways that carbon credits provide us an opportunity. The first is when we look at it from a micro point of view, I see them as creating an additional revenue stream. The best use case, if you look, I want to use Paygo Solar as an example. 10 years ago, that's what climate was. It was Paygo Solar. And it was really interesting. It was a really interesting concept because the idea was you create massive, massive impact. We're going to electrify all of Africa, and we're going to do that through hardware. And it worked for some time, but what we realized is that it's actually more complicated than it looks. The business model, it's a lot of hardware, takes a lot of capex, and you need these flexible payment models to make it work in Africa. But what that means is long payback periods. What investors realize is that, well, it might be a little difficult to fund this because massive capex, the break even can take 5 years, can take 10 years. So this became an issue, and it made it less likely VC investment and made investors a little hesitant to invest in this space. What carbon credits can do is provide an additional revenue stream that acts as a buffer that shortens the timeline to break even, and that makes businesses that otherwise wouldn't have been able to scale as much as they did. Companies like Burn, companies like Phoenix, companies like BioLite, for example. Give them an additional buffer in their revenue stream so they can expand across markets, so they can expand across Africa, and so they can make that massive impact across the continent that really climate tech needs, in my opinion. So that's the first element. And then if you take a more broader view, you have, I guess, the innovation as well as the funding opportunity that there is here. I just want to put out some numbers right now. So in Africa, I think between like 2016 and 2021, 11% of the carbon credits issued were from Africa globally. 11%. I think in the past 2 or 3 years, that's increased maybe 4%, maybe 5%, but it's still a relatively small number. But for context, the UN recently did another study. Africa's only using like 2-3% of its actual carbon credit potential. There are landscapes that don't exist anywhere else in the world. Look at Turkana, for example. Regardless of the day, regardless of the season, you go to Turkana, you put up a wind turbine, you're going to get a consistent 50 knots. You don't have that at other places in the world. So I think one other benefit for carbon credits and the potential for Africa is really to spur innovation, spur development, and really catalyze all this climate finance investment that's coming in to create more opportunity for climate finance and climate tech infrastructure across the continent.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just to complement that, for sure, it's also the co-benefits that come with the amount of de-risking that carbon finance can bring into the renewable energy space. And in Africa, you're looking at over 600 million, over 40% actually, who still don't have access to electricity. So carbon finance really does provide that upfront costs that de-risk those kinds of investments through pre-sales, through investment that comes through forward agreements and so on. But there are, it's not always a straightforward or a rosy process. And there's definitely been challenges within the renewable energy space, which we'll probably get more into, that also need to be addressed in order to ensure sustainability in accessing carbon finance and to maintain the market confidence within renewable energy credits in Africa globally, but yeah, in Africa as well.
Thank you for that. Now thank you for setting the cue for the next part of it, which is, yes, we want to use carbon credits in the best way possible to drive innovation and development within the sector, but there are potential pitfalls that we may fall in, right? And maybe I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of these things that we may fall in without knowing, and how can we mitigate those to ensure that we achieve sustainability?
Okay, so I think I can start on this one. I'll be a bit of a negative Nancy here. So I think a common pitfall that we face is just a general mismatch of problem and solution, where very fastly, just using sustainability as a blanket statement. So what exactly falls under the umbrella of sustainability? Very broad term. So say if you want to claim to be net zero, you'd want to reduce your emissions as much as possible and then sort of offset where you fall short, right? And once you come to offsetting as well, you'd ideally want to look to sort of removal credits. Think of afforestation, biochar, which is has a huge market share in removals. You could look at enhanced rock weathering, also dependent on the type and durability of the carbon credits that you'd want. You could look to capture and storage as well. But also under the sustainability umbrella as well, you could also want to sort of spur environmental conservation, right? And to that, you could possibly look to purchase REDD+ credits or clean cooking credits, which would be best fit for that. So a common pitfall that we face is a mismatch of the problem that you want to solve under the sustainability umbrella, and then sort of mismatching the solution with that. So that's where there's a common pitfall in trying to leverage carbon credits in driving sustainability.
Yeah, and on top of that, I think having been in the carbon development space, I think one thing that we've observed is that people will come into the carbon market space expecting huge returns, and they do not exactly cut their costs. And as Asad was mentioning, there are long payback periods. There's a huge capex that goes into these projects. There are economies of scale that are required. So, for example, if you're developing a renewable energy project, 5 megawatt hours is really on the floor side. That is your micro scale project. So people will approach you and say, hey, what can we do with this very small plant that we have? of renewable energy, and not considering the skill that's required, the amount of investment, and also where the market is in terms of those particular credits. If you're looking at clean cooking, you also need hundreds of thousands of units being distributed in order for that project to make any economic sense. So it's really, what we say is really considering carbon as the icing on the cake and not seeing it as the entire business model, because then you get disappointed. And one particular principle that's important for renewable energy projects is additionality, and it's a principle that these projects would not happen without carbon finance. So if projects are already viable without carbon finance, then they do not meet the additionality quality, and that has been the bone of contention for renewable energy credits currently within the market. We've seen Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, ICVCM, which is now considered the market integrity standard, just reject methodologies in the VCM for renewable energy credits. And that has been on the grounds of additionality, that more and more these renewable projects are becoming more accessible in investment, and some projects do not meet that additionality requirement. So it's important to consider, where are you setting up this project? Is it in a least developed country, which the likes of Vera Gold Standard now require, or it's an area that has very low market penetration rates that actually warrant this investment? So I think it's very important to look at the entire business model and how carbon finance comes in, because it's easy to get in a very high-risk environment and not being aware of everything that's going on. So with the market confidence and with the additionality requirements for these projects, we've seen even the prices within the VCM go very low, and some even getting less than $1 for credit. So it's important to, one, consider those high quality, high integrity requirements, and then if you're confident that you have a high quality project, then aim for premium markets, like compliance markets, which allow renewable energy credits, or the now Article 6 that's been in development.
Awesome. Maybe back to you, Diana. You mentioned the mismatch between your intentions and the type of carbon credits that you're going for, right? How then do we ensure that you're transparent, you're ensuring that you're integral in everything that you're doing to prevent greenwashing or fraud within the carbon credits market?
I think I can obviously now speak from a project developer perspective, and we can sort of divide fraud and greenwashing into different sort of categories. So much as fraud and just ensuring integrity and transparency just all boils down to the standards that a project developer chooses. Assad put it really well, that there's various standards and methodologies that you can develop your project against, and there's a lack of sort of standardization of these standards, if that makes sense, which is great. Having a variety spurs innovation, spurs variety as well, and spurs competition as well. But that sort of, it all boils down to really the rigor of the standard that we're choosing to develop our projects against. Especially for very hardware-based projects. What matters a lot is also how to look at life cycle emissions as you also develop your project stuff, at least for very relevant to us in the hardware and capture space. Stuff like steel, fuel, accounting for that to the very last decimal is incredibly, incredibly important. Just ensuring that transparency and integrity. I mean, greenwashing, there's not one answer, though there are several policies, especially in the EU, that are coming up, and notice the trend that once the EU develops a policy, that I think the globe follows suit. I believe they're coming up, or they've already implemented, like the Green Claims Directive, where you need to sort of substantiate your claims and then just moving away from very generic terms like eco-friendly or green without having the sort of certification to back this very friendly labels that we often see in products, etc., etc. So with greenwashing, I believe that there's a lot of work to be done, especially on the policy space. But stuff like the Green Claims Directive is putting in baby steps there that I think we need to also follow suit. Yeah.
Great. And maybe now when we look at the two of them combined, AI and carbon credits, they have a lot of potential, but there's also the mishap that we may have short-term gains. How do we ensure that we drive long-term vision of sustainability and prevent the need for continuous innovation?
Good question. I can take that. I think with everything that you develop, be it a product, for the ones who are building their startups, you have to have the long-term vision in mind from the get-go, right? You can then start and then along the way decide, okay, now I'm starting to think about the vision and to start incorporating it. Think about it this way. Say, for example, you're building a product that's currently serving 100 people, and your database ends at 100 people, right? What happens when you get the one-on-one client? It crashes. So when you're building, you have to think about scale, number one. You also have to think about the impact your solution will have to the environment and incorporate that in the beginning in one way or another, or take that into account, such that when you get to that level where maybe you want to take on more, it can be able to transition. I would say that's one way of going about it. But also, when we are incentivizing the carbon credits, we also have to keep in mind, how do we then, the people we decide to work with from the beginning, have them even in our long-term vision, such that people are not just coming on because of the incentive, because of the revenue, but then they drop off along the way. Maybe if someone else comes and offers them more, etc., etc. So then you have to have these things in your mind from the get-go, and you have to take them into account so that, yeah, it contributes towards your long-term vision.
Yeah. I want to use a metaphor that I used in the past. It's literally a machine. You have good inputs, you have good outputs. Good inputs in this sense would be you have accelerators, you have these groups, you have a good ecosystem that you can plug in to what we're trying to build. And as a result, we get something that's really beautiful, which is a vibrant climate tech community. But what I will say here is that it's really hard. It's really hard. Climate tech is really new. We're getting some traction. I think this year was the first year where climate tech funding has outperformed fintech funding. But now this is just the start. What matters is like how we go about from here. And what really matters here is where we align the short-term element with the long-term vision. The long-term vision is, well, we need to combat climate change. We need to solve the biggest problem in the world. Question becomes, how do you do that? Our theory is, well, you bring together a bunch of awesome people doing awesome things and bring them together for like a long period of time so they can do more awesome things. A really important element of that is companies like Afrigreen and other that are creating platforms for us to discuss, have free flow discussions, exchanging of ideas. A really important avenue is accelerators like the ones GIZ has, Delta 40 has. You have some initiatives by Founders Factory even. A new initiative we created at Holocene, which is a climate finance accelerator, partnering with like AWS, AfricTech, Startup Bootcamp, to allow these founders that have incredible ideas, that are very passionate, and that are driven to make this startup succeed, as well as create a massive change in the community. But not necessarily, they're a little early on to have a business model that works. So you have accelerators that give them the tools, give them the technical assistance, give them an idea on how to commercialize a product and a concept and really achieve product market fit in Africa. So I guess my long-winded answer to your question is, you need everyone, you need to build a community, you need an ecosystem that shares ideas, that's collaborative, and that really tackles this problem together, because at the end of the day, the more minds we have that go towards this, the better.
Great. And then when we bring everyone together, I think that the person who we need to tag on along is always the government and all these international bodies. If they're not working with us through that journey, then they'll become the hurdle at that point of the road, right? So maybe a question back to you guys is, how do you think the government or these other international bodies can support the use of AI or carbon credits in the use in development of renewable energy?
Okay, I think we can, just on the carbon credit side, I think there's been a lot happening in Africa on the regulatory space, with a number of countries setting up their regulatory frameworks. We've seen Kenya amend its Climate Change Act 2016 to include carbon markets, carbon credits, and we've also seen them release the 2024 carbon regulations. And I think that's a great step in the right direction in ensuring that there is more of a space that's more predictable for investment, which has been, when the wind of regulations began swooping in, would see investors, first of all, back off and wait to see where the regulations go. But with a more predictable space, then investment beginning to flow back in. And I think one area, or maybe a couple of areas specific to renewable energy would be the safeguards, and that they of course meet, whether in the voluntary carbon space or meets in the compliance space, that they meet the requirements within those particular systems. But there are also safeguards within those projects, especially where they touch on communities, biodiversity, and where there are negative impacts, that there are safeguarding strategies and plans for this project to ensure no harm as they generate climate mitigation benefits. Yeah.
Good. I agree with most of what you've said. I think I'll just add. So then, just a quick check. How many of us have ever worked with the government or international organizations, either as partners or being sponsored? Great. So then we have to check some boxes. Like a question like, are you tax compliant? That's something we get asked, right? And there are some organizations you can't work with if you're not tax compliant, or you have to be maybe adhering to human rights rules and whatnot. So then why not have that checkbox that then says, if you're building an AI product, it's being built sustainably, or if you are in the carbon credit space, you're doing it sustainably, or you're being, I think what I'm trying to say is there has to be some vetting. And the same way we check boxes to be able to work with governments or international organizations, there should be a box that then confirms what you're doing it sustainably. I'll give you an example. Currently, the data centers use up 2% of the global energy, right? So if you're thinking about that, and in 2030, this will triple. And this is massive energy that the AI space is consuming. Yeah, so data centers are needed to be able to build AI products. Now, if an organization wants to use an AI product, why can't it then vet and understand that this AI product is being run by data centers that are using renewable energy? Because that's something that data centers need to transition into in the next few years. Otherwise, we are looking at dire times when it comes to running data centers with non-renewable energy. So for me, I would say international organizations and governments should have boxes that need to be checked to ensure that the products they're using or the people they're partnering with are doing it sustainably.
Great. We're done. Just give us.
I don't have a microphone. Yeah, as they conclude, if you have any questions and you'd like to put your hand up and ask them, now would be the opportunity. Here you go.
Exactly. Yeah, we're opening the floor to any questions that you may have. Happy to take. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think maybe closing off and that last point on governments is we at A3, we encourage our own portfolio companies to be part of the journey with the governments. They need to be there making the regulations, making the policies. Otherwise, if they are caught on the other end and they don't know now what to do, then it's a lost situation for them. We hope we weren't as technical as he said. But happy for you guys to catch us later. We have your AI. Allow me to take one question, right?
Yeah, great question, and yeah, thinking for the entire world, because that infrastructure is really still being set up. But at the very international stage, is that there is international discourse around carbon markets under the Paris Agreement, and which are under the Article 6, which will require governments to be able to monitor and report the carbon credit space within their countries, and a lot of that will set up how the market will go in the coming years. And mostly the focal points, the designated national authorities have been thinking around what the registries would look like, so that every project within a country is basically in a registry. There is public disclosure of all the mitigation benefits, so therefore setting those infrastructures for monitoring, reporting, and verification. And that is really meant to steer the markets, both the voluntary carbon markets and the compliance markets. So at a national level, that is what that would look like.
Yeah, maybe just to also answer from our end, what we've seen is if you digitize the entire process, you have data along the way, and you can verify the entire process, right? So from the moment you're collecting the data to when you're verifying it, certifying it, selling it, decommissioning those credits, if that whole process is digitized, then you're able to create a sustainable ecosystem where you prevent all the likes of fraud, greenwashing, and etc. that comes with it. So I think whether it's the policies to support it, I think the digitization is also needed throughout the entire process to support the ecosystem. Awesome. I think that's it from us.